All right, in this video, we are going to be starting chapter 2 of college algebra. And so in section 2.1, I want to go over some basic ideas inside of what we call the rectangular coordinate system, which is really going to be an introduction to our chapter of graphing that we're going to see over the next few days or few videos, I should say. So one of the things we got to make sure that we are aware of is that I want to do a quick little refresher on plotting points. And so there's many different ways to graph equations in this class, and we're going to see a bunch of them the next few videos that you watch. But one of the most basic ways to graph an equation is just by strictly plotting points and plotting the x and y coordinates. So for example, on number 1 here, you are being asked to plot y equals x squared plus 1. And what they're going to have you do is fill out this nice little grid here where you need to fill in your x and your y combos, and that's going to create the points that you want to plot. Now, typically, when it comes to graphing any equation by plotting points, what I will typically do is I will try to create some kind of symmetry in my x values. And what I mean by that is, if possible, I'm going to let x equal 0 be my middle point. That's a good central location. And then I will go equal distance in both directions. So, for example, if I wanted to graph at x equals 1, then I would go the same distance in the other way and go to x equals -1. And then from here, you can either do it in your head or you can use your calculator. We are going to plug these three x values into the equation, and that will give you your three y values. So if you were to plug -1 in, -1 times -1 is 1, and 1 plus 1 is 2. If you were to plug in 0, you should get a value of 1. And if you plug in 1, 1 squared plus 1 also gives you 2. And so what this has now done is you have created three different ordered pairs that you can now plot. So as a quick reminder, when you're plotting points, your x-axis runs left and right. So negative x's go left, positive x's go to the right, and your y values run up and down with negative y values going down and positive y values going up. So if I were to plot the point -1, +2, I would go -1 to the left, so 1 left on x, and then up 2, and that would be my first point. When I move down and plot the point 0, 1, since your x value is 0, it doesn't move, and you're just going to go up 1 on the y-axis. And then finally, the point 1, 2, you're going to go right 1 on the x-axis and up 2, and then we're going to play connect the dots. So what ends up happening here is you end up drawing a graph that looks something like this. And so that is one of the most basic ways of graphing equations. So when in doubt, we're going to learn a bunch of different ways to graph stuff. If you end up not liking that technique, you can always resort back to basically plotting points to draw any graph in this class. Now, a second way that we can graph equations is by intercepts. And so what I want to do is remind you about how you do that. So for example, number 2, I would like you to find the x and y intercepts and use them to graph the following equation. Excuse me. So for number 2, it's 2x minus 3y equals 8. And so as a refresher, anytime you want to find an x-intercept of any graph, the definition of an x-intercept means you have to let y equal 0. So if I go to my original equation and I let y be 0, you will have 2x minus 3 times 0 equals 8. Well, as we know, 3 times 0 is just 0, so that goes away. 2x will equal 8. And then we will divide both sides by 2, and you will get an x value equal to 4. And so if I go to my grid here and go to the x-axis, we know that my graph must cross the x-axis at 4, which is also known as the point 4, 0. Similarly, we're going to find the y-intercept. So for the definition of a y-intercept, we're going to let x be 0. And so I'll do the work over here on the right a little bit. you're going to have 2 times 0 minus 3y equals 8 from the original equation. Well, as we know, 2 times 0 goes away, and you are left with negative 3y equals 8. And if you divide both sides by negative 3, 8 divided by negative 3 does not simplify, so you would just end up at negative 8/3. So what you could do is you could use your calculator here if you'd like, and negative 8/3 is about negative 2.6. So I'm going to go to approximately that location and plot that point, which can also be represented as the point 0, negative 8/3. And then what I would do is I would draw my graph through those 2 points. And as you can see, with only 2 points here, this draws a straight line that's going in an upward direction. And so that is the technique of plotting with intercepts. And we'll see that a few more times over the next few videos in chapter 2. So also in this first section, we're going to get away from graphing just for a second. And there's a couple of formulas I want to make sure that you are aware of. One of them is the midpoint formula. So sometimes we will need the midpoint to evaluate certain ideas. And so anytime you are asked to find the midpoint of each line segment, you would need to be given 2 points. So as you can see in number 3, we have the point -1,7 and the point -3, -2. This formula over here on the right in the black box is how you will find the midpoint of this line. So one thing to notice is that midpoint, it's in the name, is a point. So you have to find an x value and a y value of a midpoint. That can be done by first, for your x values, adding the two x values together and dividing it by 2. And for the y value, doing the exact same thing, adding the y values together and dividing by 2. So when we look at our 2 points given here, the point -1,7, since that's the first point given to me, I'll let that be my x1 and y1. And since -3, -2 is my second point given, I'll call that x2, y2. I'm going to plug these 4 numbers into my midpoint formula. And so when I do that, we should end up with my x1 value, which is -1, plus my x2, which is -3, divided by 2, comma, my y1, which is 7, plus my y2, which is -2, divided by 2. And so now we're going to clean this up. This would come out to be -1 plus a -3 is -4 divided by 2. 7 plus -2 is 5 divided by 2. And looking at these two fractions, -4 divided by 2 is -2, while 5/2 does not simplify. So I will leave it exactly like that. And that is the value of your midpoint. So if you were to plot these 2 points on a graph and then draw a line between them, this point here would end up being the midpoint of that line segment. Right? The second formula I want to make sure you're aware of is we're also going to need to know how to find distance. All right. So if you're given 2 points and you're asked to find how far those 2 points are away from each other, that's the same thing as calculating distance. Now, first thing I want to do is make sure you're aware of the formula and make sure you jot it down so you have it. To find the distance between 2 points, it involves square roots, subtraction, and squaring values. So you would need to take the square root of x2 minus x1 squared and add to that y2 minus y1 squared. Just like the last problem, I'm going to label my points in a very similar way. My first point, I'm going to let that be x1, y1. And my second point, I'm going to let that be x2, y2. And then I'm going to plug these 4 numbers into my distance formula. So distance would come out to be the square root of x2, which is -2, minus x1, which is 1, and we'll square that, plus our y2 value, which is 3, minus our y1, which is 5, squared. Simplifying what I can, -2 minus 1 will make this a -3 squared, and then 3 minus 5 makes that a -2 squared. Let's see, -3 times -3 is +9, and then -2 times -2 is +4, and if you add those two numbers together, you get the square root of 13. Square 13 does not break down using a factor tree, even if you give it a shot. So in this case, this is as far as the problem will go. And so that is the exact answer for our distance between these 2 points. And so in this video on section 2.1, we went over a couple of basic graphing techniques, whether it be plotting points or whether it be X and Y intercepts. And I also went over a couple of formulas that will be beneficial to us in midpoint and distance. In the next video, we're going to introduce the idea of circles when it comes to algebra and talk about some of the characteristics of that.